The soft glow of the nightlight painted the nursery in hues of lavender and pale yellow, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to mimic the gentle sway of the mobile above the crib. 6-month-old Lily slept soundly, her tiny chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm that should have filled Sarah with an overwhelming sense of contentment. But tonight, a knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach, a feeling she couldn't quite shake. It had been a week of fitful nights, not just for Lily, who was teething, but for Sarah herself. There was a subtle shift in the atmosphere of their home, a quiet hum of wrongness that resonated deep within her. Mark, ever the pragmatist, attributed it to the normal stresses of new parenthood, the sleep deprivation playing tricks on her mind. "You're just tired, honey," he'd said that morning, his voice gentle as he kissed her forehead. "We both are. It'll get easier." Sarah desperately wanted to believe him. She longed for the uncomplicated joy she'd imagined motherhood would be, the pure, unadulterated love that would eclipse all worries. But lately, the worries seemed to have a life of their own, whispering doubts in the quiet corners of her mind. It had started subtly, almost imperceptibly. A faint rustling sound on the baby monitor that wasn't quite static, a whisper that could have been the wind chimes outside their bedroom window. Sarah would jolt awake in the dead of night, straining to hear, but by the time her senses fully returned, the sounds would be gone, leaving her questioning her own sanity. Mark, a deep sleeper, heard nothing. He'd stir briefly when she nudged him, his responses mumbled and reassuring, but ultimately dismissive. "Just a dream, Sarah. Go back to sleep." But then came the night of the lullaby. Sarah had been downstairs, finally enjoying a lukewarm cup of tea after putting Lily down. Mark was out on a late-sight visit, something that happened occasionally given his demanding career. The house was quiet, save for the soft melody drifting from the baby monitor on the kitchen counter, a gentle instrumental version of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star that Sarah had set as Lily's usual bedtime sound. Suddenly, the familiar tune was overlaid with another voice, a low, almost guttural hum that seemed to vibrate through the small speaker. It wasn't singing words, not exactly, but it had a rhythm, a cadence that felt ancient and unsettling. Sarah froze, her blood running cold. She held her breath, straining to differentiate between the music and the intrusive sound. It persisted for a few more agonizing seconds before fading away, leaving only the saccharine notes of the lullaby. She rushed upstairs, her heart pounding in her chest, and burst into the nursery. Lily was still asleep, her cherubic face peaceful, her tiny hands curled into fists beside her head. There was nothing out of place, no sign that anything was amiss. Downstairs, Sarah replayed the baby monitor recording, her hands shaking as she navigated the app on her phone. But there was nothing. The recording was clear, the lullaby undisturbed. Had she imagined it? Was the stress finally getting to her? She wanted to dismiss it, to chalk it up to an overactive imagination fueled by exhaustion. But the memory of that low hum, that unnatural rhythm, was too vivid, too visceral to ignore. Over the next few days, the incidents continued, though they remained fleeting and difficult to pin down. A scratching sound from within the walls when Lily was crying, a whisper that seemed to emanate from the monitor even when it wasn't picking up Lily's sounds. Sarah started to feel like she was losing her grip. She found herself constantly checking on Lily, her anxiety a palpable presence in the house. She mentioned it to Mark again, her voice trembling slightly as she recounted the lullaby incident. He listened patiently, holding her hand, but his eyes held a familiar mixture of concern and skepticism. "Sarah, honey, I know you're tired. Maybe we should talk to your doctor?" Postpartum anxiety can manifest in different ways. His suggestion stung, even though she knew he meant well. She wasn't imagining things. She knew what she had heard. One evening, as Sarah was rocking Lily to sleep, humming a gentle tune, she heard it again. A faint whisper, barely audible above her own voice and Lily's soft sighs, sounded like a name, her name. Sarah. The sound was so close, so intimate. It felt as though someone was standing right beside her, breathing in her ear. She froze, her heart leaping into her throat. Lily stirred in her arms, her eyes fluttering open briefly before closing again. Sarah scanned the room, her gaze darting to the shadows in the corners, the closed window, the silent baby monitor on the dresser. There was no one else there. That night, sleep offered no escape. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside the window, amplified her growing fear. She lay awake, listening intently, her senses on high alert. It was then, in the deepest part of the night, that she heard it again, this time clearer, closer. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a voice, low and raspy, emanating from the baby monitor beside their bed. It wasn't Lily's soft cooing or her occasional cries. It wasn't Mark's gentle snoring beside her. This voice was different. It was older, malevolent, and it spoke 3 chilling words that solidified Sarah's deepest fears. "She's not your baby." Those 3 words echoed in Sarah's mind like a malevolent mantra, shattering any hope that she had imagined at all. "She's not your baby." She sat bolt upright in bed, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Mark, finally disturbed by her sudden tension, stirred. "What is it, Sarah?" His voice thick with sleep. She turned to him, his face a blur in the darkness. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling so badly she barely recognized it. "Did you hear that?" Mark sat up, his eyes squinting to see her in the gloom. "Hear what? I didn't hear anything. Did you have another nightmare?" The skepticism in his voice, the complete dismissal, was like a slap in the face. But this time she couldn't let it go. She pointed a shaking finger at the baby monitor, its faint blue light flickering, seemingly mocking her. "That voice," she said. It said, "Lily isn't our baby." A tense silence filled the room. Mark looked at her for a long moment, a look of incomprehension on his face. Finally, he sighed, a sound filled with weariness and frustration. "Sarah," he said, his voice firm, "I think you really need to see a doctor. Those words, they're a sign that you're struggling. I'm here for you. We can get through this." He reached for her hand, an attempt at comfort. But his comfort wasn't what she needed. She needed validation. She needed him to believe her. The next morning, the tension between them was palpable. Mark had left for work early, after a brief but heated argument. She insisted she wasn't crazy. He insisted she wasn't well. She had seen a flash of something unsettling in his eyes, a flicker she had never seen before. It was a look as if he was seeing a stranger, a person he no longer recognized. And that, more than any voice on the monitor, terrified her. After Mark left, Sarah began an investigation of her own. She had to prove she hadn't imagined it. She retrieved the baby monitor and began to take it apart. It was an older model they had received from a friend of her mother's, a classic Motorola with good audio quality, though it lacked the advanced recording features of newer models. She checked the app on her phone, sifting through every setting, looking for any sign of a hidden recording or strange settings. Nothing. Everything was normal. Then she turned to the physical machine. She used a small screwdriver set to carefully remove the outer casing, revealing the intricate circuitry inside. She was no expert in electronics, but as a photographer, she had a keen eye for abnormalities, for tiny flaws in a composition. And she found it. Tucked away between a cable and a small capacitor was a tiny chip, no larger than her pinky nail. It didn't look like anything else in the machine. It looked like a transmitter or a recording device of some kind. It had a small, faded label, and as she squinted, she could make out a string of numbers and letters etched into it. She took a close-up photo of it. Her fingers trembled as she began searching for that number string on her phone. She found no results initially, but then, by refining her search to include keywords like audio tracking chip and bugging device, she found a shady website, accessible only through a private browser. It was a marketplace for illegal surveillance devices, and among dozens of listings, there was one that matched her description. Micro audio transmitter, remote controlled, integrates with common devices. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Who had put this chip in her monitor? And why? And who had said those words that had terrified her so much? She remembered her mother's friend, the one who had given them the monitor. Her name was Eleanor, a sweet elderly woman who lived a few states away. But Sarah recalled that it was Mark who had driven to pick up the monitor from a drop-off point in a nearby town, because Eleanor had said she was in the middle of a move. He had said it was a kind gesture. But now it looked like a conveniently arranged opportunity. A dark shadow of suspicion began to crawl through her mind, indistinct and frightening. Couldn't be. Mark couldn't have done this. He was her kind, loving husband. He was Lily's father. And yet, another cold question formed in her. If Mark isn't Lily's father, is Mark the one who did this? She scrolled through old photos on her phone, looking for any sign of a change, any small detail that might suggest a bigger secret. She found pictures of Mark and her from when they first started dating. He was a little thinner, his hair a little longer, a bright, carefree smile that seemed to have been lost in recent years. Then, she found a file of photos with a strange tag. It was called Project Files Elm Street House. She didn't remember taking it. It contained dozens of photos of an old, abandoned house on the edge of town. There was nothing particularly remarkable about it, except for one photo in the set. It was a picture of a dusty old box, what looked like a family heirloom box, in the basement of the house. Inside the box were old photos, yellowed letters, and a birth certificate. Sarah zoomed in on the birth certificate. The name on it, in a fancy script, was Lily Markson. The date of birth matched their Lily's. And the parents listed were not her and Mark. A cold shiver ran down Sarah's spine. This made no sense. Their daughter was named Lily Markson, but this birth certificate was Lily Markson, and the date of birth matched exactly. Yet the parents' names were different. The mother was listed as Eleanor Vance, the same woman who had given them the baby monitor, and the father was listed as Mark Finch. Sarah knew her Mark, but who was Mark Finch? A horrifying truth began to form in her mind, vague and unbelievable. Her Mark. Was his real name Mark Finch? And was Lily not their daughter after all? Sarah's panic was reaching a fever pitch. She looked towards Lily, sleeping peacefully in her crib. Lily's skin was fair and her hair was a light brown and curly. Mark had dark brown hair and Sarah was a blonde. They both had brown eyes. But Lily had blue eyes, a color that no one in her or Mark's family had. They had chalked it up to a strange genetic quirk from a distant ancestor. But now the doubt was gnawing at her. Was it evidence of a larger secret? She had trusted Mark implicitly, but these discoveries were shattering that trust into a million tiny pieces. She had to confront him. She had to know the truth. When Mark came home that evening, his face was grim. He had sensed her tension over the phone, but he was not prepared for what she was about to say to him. Sarah had laid out the disassembled baby monitor on the kitchen table, with the tiny chip carefully placed next to it. Her phone was open to the dark website, showing a picture of the chip and its description. She also had the photo of the birth certificate of Lily Markson, from the photos she had found on Mark's phone. "Mark," she began, her voice trembling but resolute. "You need to explain. You need to tell me what's going on. Who is Eleanor Vance? Who is Lily Markson? And why does this monitor have a bugging chip in it?" Mark looked at the kitchen table, his expression shifting from confusion to a terrifying tension Sarah had never seen. He couldn't speak. She had found a secret, and it was a secret he had been hiding for far too long. Silence descended on the kitchen, heavy and suffocating. Mark stared at the evidence on the table, his face shifting from shock to a grim desperation. "Sarah, I can explain," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. But Sarah was beyond the point of patience. "Explain what? That you've been lying to me? That you've been listening to me? That our daughter isn't our daughter?" The questions spilled out in a torrent, each one laced with pain and betrayal. Mark put his hands on the table, clenching them into fists. "This is a complicated story," he began, but Sarah cut him off. "You're not keeping it anymore, Mark. That chip, the birth certificate, the voice on the monitor. What have you done?" Her voice rose, filled with fury and fear. He looked at her, and finally, The truth spilled out of him, like a storm that had been held back for too long. Eleanor Vance is Lily's birth mother, he confessed, his voice shaking. She was an old friend, someone I loved when I was younger, before I met you. She got pregnant and we went our separate ways. She gave birth to Lily, but she had severe postpartum depression. She couldn't take care of Lily. I promised her I would find Lily a loving home. And I found you. Sarah recoiled, as if struck. You found me? What the hell are you talking about? You chose me? She looked at Mark, a man she had trusted with her whole heart. He looked like a stranger. So this whole thing was a plan? Our marriage? Everything? Mark shook his head. No, Sarah. In the beginning, maybe. I knew you longed to be a mother. I knew you would be an amazing mother. But I fell in love with you. I truly fell in love with you. It wasn't a plan. It was love. Lily needed a mother. And you were the only person I could trust. His confession, instead of soothing her, made her pain even deeper. He had built their life on a lie. Their marriage was a giant secret, an elaborate deception. She looked at the picture of Lily in her arms, and a horrible truth dawned on her. She had always felt an intense connection to Lily, a fierce and instinctive love. But was she a mother to her? The cold dread she had felt from the voice on the monitor, the confirmation that Lily was not hers, came back to haunt her. So the voice on the monitor? She asked, her voice a barely audible whisper. Who was it? Eleanor? Mark nodded, tears streaming down his face. She's had regrets. She's been watching us. She's been trying to get to the baby. I've been trying to keep her away. Sarah felt a chilling horror. So you've been listening to me? To keep track of her? To make sure she didn't get close? Do you know that what you did is illegal? You've done unimaginable things. The pain in Sarah's heart turned to rage. You've ruined this family. You've ruined everything we've built. You lied to me. You don't deserve to be called Lily's father. Mark flinched, his eyes wide. Sarah, I did it for you, for Lily, he pleaded. We're a family. She's not stable. She wants to take the baby away. But it was too late. The trust was broken. Sarah couldn't look at him without seeing the deception. She couldn't look at Lily's face without remembering her birth mother, the woman who had been watching them, who had planted that bugging chip and whispered cruel words into her ear. A battle had erupted, but not of words, but of emotions and harsh realities. The conflict reached its climax on a night when Mark and Sarah were in a fierce argument. Lily, awakened by the shouting, began to cry. Sarah ran upstairs, scooped the baby up, and looked into Lily's deep blue eyes. This was not her biological daughter. The sense of emptiness and betrayal overwhelmed her. She knew she couldn't continue this life. She couldn't live in a lie. On one fateful morning, Eleanor arrived, armed with a court order. Mark had left for work. Sarah was home, and when she opened the door, she saw a gaunt-looking woman with hollow eyes, a look of both desperation and determination on her face. I've come for my daughter, Eleanor said, handing Sarah the paper. The order gave Eleanor temporary custody, based on a testimony that Sarah was mentally unstable and Mark had been hiding the baby. Sarah called Mark, but it was too late. Eleanor had taken Lily. Sarah collapsed to the floor, a horrible pain tearing through her. She had lost her daughter. She had lost her husband. Her life had been shattered into a million pieces. She looked at the baby monitor, now silent, and a painful question echoed in her mind. Was the voice right? Did she deserve to be Lily's mother? And she knew she had to find the answer to all of this, even if it broke her heart into a million tiny pieces. Lily's departure left a painful void in the house, a cold and terrible silence that was more profound than any whisper on the monitor. Sarah spent the first few days in a daze, but her grief slowly hardened into a fierce resolve. She couldn't let this be the end. She had to get Lily back. She had to expose the truth about Eleanor and her manipulation. Mark came home, completely broken. She took her, he said, his face pale with shock. She told the court you were unstable. She used the words from the baby monitor against us. Sarah looked at him with a cold detachment. Did you tell the court? Did you tell them Eleanor planted a bugging chip in the monitor? That she was watching us? Mark shook his head. No, I was too scared. They wouldn't have believed me. I had too much to hide. Mark's weakness made Sarah realize she couldn't rely on him. She had to do this on her own. She found a lawyer, a sharp-witted woman who seemed to understand the complexities of the case. She presented all of her evidence. The picture of the chip, the recordings of the threats from the monitor, and the truth about Mark not being Lily's biological father. She knew this would destroy their marriage, but she had decided she would do anything to get her daughter back. The case went to court, and the shocking secrets were finally revealed. Eleanor was charged with illegal surveillance and psychological manipulation. Mark was charged with fraud and for withholding crucial information. But the most shocking truth, the secret that had been buried in the basement of the Elm Street house, was brought to light. An investigator had found old medical records hidden in Eleanor's family heirloom box. They revealed that Eleanor Vance had lost a baby girl a year ago, a tragic loss that had sent her into a spiral of mental illness. Lily was not her daughter. She was simply a tormented woman who had become obsessed with finding a baby to replace the one she had lost. And the secret that was buried in that Elm Street house had also been resolved. A horrifying truth was revealed. The baby who had passed away, the baby Eleanor had been grieving for, had died due to neglect. A terrifying fact, and another one, was that Mark wasn't Lily's biological father, but also wasn't the one who had hidden all the things. Mark had been threatened by Eleanor, who told him that she would do anything to get the baby back. All of this had made Mark panic, and he had decided to take matters into his own hands. The truth had finally been brought to light. Eleanor Vance was found guilty of psychological abuse and was committed to a mental institution. Mark was charged with withholding information and was given a suspended prison sentence. And Sarah, the woman who had gone through a horrible nightmare, was reunited with Lily. But her life would never be the same again. She had lost her trust in Mark. She had realized that she had been living in a lie. She had realized that she had loved a man who had been hiding a terrible secret. She had decided she could not continue this marriage. She and Mark were divorced. Sarah and Lily moved to a different city. She found a new job and she tried to rebuild her life. But every time she looked at Lily, she was reminded of what had happened. She was reminded of the words on the baby monitor. She was reminded of Mark's betrayal. She was reminded of the painful loss of her daughter. Her life had returned to normal, but she knew she would never be completely normal again. She had learned that life can change in an instant. She had learned that secrets can destroy your life. And she had learned that love can exist in a lie, but trust cannot. In the end, Sarah and Lily found happiness, but it was a happiness that was covered in scars. And every time she looked at the baby monitor, she was reminded of a horrible story of deception, of loss, and of a terrifying truth that had been hidden in the shadows. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on the next gripping stories.